Well, good morning. It's Easter Sunday. For some of you, that means getting ready for church. For some, it's a day to chase kids around looking for brightly colored eggs and candy that were hidden away by the Easter Bunny. And for others, it's a day off and an opportunity to kick back or get out and enjoy some late winter fun. In any case, I'm glad you could join us this morning as we talk with a person who has served as the chaplain at Marquette General Hospital for the past 18 years. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, our guest this morning is Reverend Leon Jarvis, who recently retired as the chaplain at UP Health System Marquette. Reverend Jarvis has an interesting personal history and has been in a unique assignment. This morning we'll talk about that and more. Reverend Jarvis, welcome to The Ryan Report.
Thanks, Don.
Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
You've got an interesting history, but before we get to that, this is Easter Sunday morning. You're an ordained priest. If you were leading a congregation this morning, what would you be talking about on this Easter?
Well, what I would talk about primarily is the fact of the empty tomb that we have worked up during Holy Week to this particular morning, and to focus on the fact that the empty tomb is indeed empty. The Lord has risen. Our hope is restored. And that as we go forth now from this point this year, we have this understanding that we truly are the children of God, and as a result, we have with us the resurrected Christ.
And we'll talk more about this, but certainly as a chaplain at a hospital, you deal with death frequently.
Sure.
Is there a message in Easter that can help us through
Definitely. The empty tomb is the message. Okay. That for Christians, they, in their baptisms, they die with the Lord, and they also rise with the Lord. And this is a true indication of that. The empty tomb is letting us know that, yes, Jesus Christ is risen. And in the church, we would say, Christ is risen, alleluia, alleluia, risen indeed, alleluia. So it gives us hope in our deaths that there is something beyond the physical death, and that is life eternal with Jesus.
Okay. Let's talk about you a little bit. You, when you were 18 years old, decided to become involved with the Capuchin group? Is that
Franciscan Capuchins.
What brought you in that direction?
I was one of those young men who sought priesthood and being in an order, but as a little boy, I used to play priest.
Okay.
And
I played radio announcer. But
well, look where we are.
That's right.
We fulfilled what we did as children. The idea of me playing priest, and I would use my mother's wine glass and as a chalice, and it was a desire of mine on and off growing up. And so when I graduated from high school, I applied to the Franciscan Capuchin order. It's an associate program preparing you. You discern if you're really called to live a life of priesthood, or if you choose to be a brother in an order. And so I was in the association for 2 years.
And after that, then you went on to the next step in the process?
The next step was I discerned that I was not a Capuchin or a Franciscan, what they call a mendicant order type of guy. So I found a monastic order in the Detroit area. So I entered the Sylvestrian congregation of the Order of St. Benedict. I became a Benedictine.
Okay. And as part of that, you became very involved in some charity work, didn't you?
Well, in the 10 years I was in the monastery, many years I worked with the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, a group of sisters, Roman Catholic sisters, whose primary focus was education, health care, and social work. And I was in the social work division working at St. Vincent Sarah Fisher Center for children and youth who had emotional disability or learning disability, that they were taken out of their homes for either abuse and neglect or because they had some mental health issues that didn't allow them to stay in the home.
Other than that work, what was life like as a
monk?
As a Benedictine monk?
We prayed 7 times a day. I lived in community. There were 16 of us at the height of when we were fullest. or most full. Our life was lived by the church calendar. And so we lived the motto of the Benedictines is ora et labora, which means to pray and to work. And so we prayed throughout the day and we worked throughout the day. We had an orchard, hundreds of apple trees. We had beef cattle, I think 30 head. We had a print shop, excuse me. So we also did parish work on weekends. The order was founded, the Benedictine order is 1,500 years old, but our particular congregation was founded in the 13th century. So we were very similar to the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and Dominicans, in that we went out to parishes and worked on weekends.
But at some point you decided this wasn't the life for you.
After 10 years, I decided that, I discerned actually, prayerfully, that it was time to leave. That I was properly dispensed by Rome. And it was hard, but I was ready. And through discernment and prayer and working with my superiors, I left.
And I think part of the reason, when we had a little chat before,
Mm-hmm.
was you kind of wanted to get from being a father in the church to being a father at some
Yes. I was getting this desire to have children, which of course you can't do in an order. And over a couple years of discernment, working, like I said, with prayer and with the superiors, I decided that, yeah, I want to be a dad. And so went through the proper process and got dispensed.
Okay. And you became married on Christmas Eve, I believe.
Yeah. A couple years later, my wife and I were married in a Lutheran church. She was Baptist and I was Catholic, and she wasn't ready to get married in a Catholic church, so we chose a Lutheran church. The pastor was the father of a friend of mine, and yeah, we were married Christmas Eve day at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, we'll talk more about what your assignment became after that
Okay.
in just a couple of minutes. We'll be back with more on the Ryan Report after this break. Our guest this morning is Reverend Leon Jarvis, who retired recently as the chaplain at UP Health System Marquette. We were kind of running through your life history there a little bit. You actually came back and got into nursing, didn't you?
Well, when we got married, my wife and I, we decided to come here 6 months after our wedding for a trip. We didn't have a honeymoon, so in May, in the beginning of June, we took a vacation to the Upper Peninsula. And I had been talking about becoming a nurse, and we came through the Upper Peninsula, stopped in Marquette, looked at the hospital. My wife was a respiratory therapist, and so we continued on our way, went up to Copper Country, went home, and when we got home, there was a full-page ad for a respiratory therapist in Marquette General. And so we decided to move here, and so that I could go to school.
Okay.
So I went to Northern, to the nursing school of nursing at that time, and I became an LPN and did part of my training at MGH, and eventually went back and was hired to work on the rehab unit as a nurse. So yeah, and I wanted to be a nurse. There's not much former monks do.
No, we're going to have to jump ahead because you ultimately became the chaplain.
Yes.
And even though at that point you weren't an ordained minister, and
No.
that kind of slowed the process down a little, didn't it?
I applied. At that time, the executive was Bob Reka, and I talked to him about it, and he took it to Bill Nemechek, who took it to the board because I wasn't ordained. But I had a divinity background, and I also had a nursing background.
Right.
So it sort of like was a good blend, and it took a while. There was a few administrative things that had to be done. And 6 months later, it was finally decided that yes, they would make the exception because I wasn't ordained to become the chaplain for the hospital.
And talk about what is the role of a hospital chaplain?
It is to provide compassionate care, being engaged with patients and families, trying to comfort those who are fearful of the hospitalization, also fearful of perhaps the procedure or operation that they're going into. There's also individuals who are having major surgery who fear death, and trying to minister to them in a comfortable way, not, to alleviate some of that anxiety with prayer and presence and being engaging and understanding. I think those are the qualities one needs to be able to engage with hospital patients in healthcare, to make it, as far as spiritual care, a positive experience.
And as far as some of these people go, some probably don't have a church connection at that point in their
Well,
life.
it's interesting because I was chaplain to everyone, not just Christians, but I had a young woman who was Muslim that I was chaplain to her. I was actually interviewed on the BBC after she had died, and I cared for her spiritually as a Muslim. And so they came to interview me, and it aired throughout the Arab world.
Okay. I think I remember that.
Yeah, here's this Christian priest providing Muslim prayers for this young woman who tragically died as a result of her husband beating her to death. So, and I talked to her dad. That was very interesting. He and I would talk using the technology we have now. And we talked, because I'm from the Detroit area and I grew up in Dearborn, which is the largest concentration of Arab-speaking Muslims in the United States. At least I had some understanding of what he was asking for. And he first wanted me to inquire if we could bury her in the Detroit area. And I explained to him, and I said, there's no one there. But here, if we bury her at Park, we'll all be here. And the city was very kind. They provided a space for her. And Jeremy Hansen provided services. And we buried her according to Muslim custom. And I think that's, again, a reflection of our community. Everyone pulled together, everyone, and till this day, you can see her monument from, was that 7th? Mm-hmm. And I drive by all the time, and I just was there at her grave the other day. As I told her dad, as long as I draw a breath, and as long as I live in this city, his daughter will be remembered, and I will visit her. So
I'm sure there are many stories.
Oh yeah, that's, yeah.
Just one of many. We have to take a break.
Okay.
We'll be back with more after we take this 2-minute break. Again, our guest this morning is Reverend Leon Jarvis. You've retired now as the chaplain.
Yes.
But you're not retiring, are you?
No. I am working at the Fossbender Swanson Funeral Homes as a pre-planning and aftercare coordinator. I had to think about it.
But this kind of ties in with a passion of yours, doesn't it?
Yes. What I'm really interested in is aftercare. Pre-planning is part of it. Aftercare, and aftercare as offered to not just our clients at the funeral homes, but more importantly to the community. And if I can get anything out during this interview, is the importance of talking about death, which we don't do well as Americans, not well at all. Having advanced directives so that your family knows what it is that you really want at the end of life, so that there's some understanding of your wishes. Those can be obtained at your doctor's office, and other healthcare providers' facilities, but really filling out advanced directives and making an advocate. Then, the idea of pre-planning before death, meeting with your local funeral director at the local funeral home. I've worked with all of them. They're well prepared to do pre-planning. The ones in Marquette, I've worked with the one in Alger County, I've worked with several in Delta County. They're prepared to assist anyone with pre-planning so that when the time comes, you have it all planned out. You don't have to worry about what's going to happen to you. It's easier on your family. It gives you some comfort before you die. Yeah, I know what's going to happen, because a lot of people do worry. And it's like, I think that's very, very important. One of the options today, too, is recent, is that you can have a funeral representative. And you can do this at pre-planning, where this is relatively new, it's legal, that this person would be designated as your funeral rep, and they would make sure that your directives as far as your funeral were followed.
Okay.
Unlike when you have families do it.
Yes.
The last thing is, let someone know where your advance directives are, where your paperwork is for your pre-planning, for your funeral. Let someone know, but most importantly is talk about it.
Okay. We have only a couple of minutes left,
Yeah.
but I know you're also concerned about the aftercare part of it.
That's the part. Aftercare is about grief.
Right.
And being able, again, this is for the community. All the local funeral directors in the funeral homes, like I said, Marquette, Delta, and the ones I've worked with in Alger, they all are very good at providing grief counseling at the time. They're good. What we're trying to accomplish is having a community-wide program where you can come from anywhere in Marquette County, and it's going to be a program that's probably once a month, and it's going to be a team approach. Considering I came out of working in rehab all those years, which was always team-oriented, it's like I'm trying to create a team where it's not just myself. I'll have somebody working with me from the church, somebody maybe from mental health, having resources available that, you know, after the foundation they received at the funeral home from the funeral director in grief, we can carry on the next step. And therefore, giving them an opportunity to have something.
And grief really can be one of the biggest challenges we face in
Debilitating.
life, isn't it?
Grief can be debilitating. And again, trying to help people to acknowledge the grief and process it. Everybody's grief is different. You know, in our society, we're not really good at grief because, just take for example, if you're working, your company gives you 3 days. You know, your parent just died, you have 3 days to get over it. And oftentimes that's all taken by funerals.
Right.
So trying to get people to acknowledge their grief, to process their grief, and again, you never forget, you learn how to live with the grief you have. It's just a matter of how do we approach it. And having a team approach gives individuals an opportunity to look at it from that perspective. Okay. Maybe it won't be me, it'll be one of the team that's able to help them process.
Well, you've had an interesting life. You've provided a valuable service for people, I know. And it's good to know that you'll still be doing that.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, thanks for being here.
Happy Easter.
Thanks. Don't leave.
Don't leave.
We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Well, let me offer a closing thought for you on this Easter morning that's more serious than the messages I usually share in this segment. It has to do with the world we live in today and what some would say is a place where intolerance and hate have become a major part of life. In his farewell speech to some State Department employees last week, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said, "This can be a very mean-spirited town, but you don't have to choose to participate in that. Each of us get to choose the person we want to be, and the way we want to be treated, and the way we will treat others." I don't make a habit of quoting Tillerson. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about him or his performance as Secretary of State. I'm quoting him because there's a lot of truth in what he said. Not only is Washington a mean-spirited town, it seems like we're living more and more in a mean-spirited world, and much of it does depend on the way we treat each other. Today, those thoughts remind me of another who spoke words on the same subject. While Easter has a special meaning around the world, the one that Christians remember today also spoke words that talked about love and caring for one another. Those words are appropriate not just for those who are members of the Christian faith. They have meaning for all of us who live on this planet. So as we think about Easter, we can recall the words of Jesus who said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Imagine what a different world it would be if everyone did, in fact, love and care about all their neighbors. Today, our world finds many reasons not to love. Instead, the world finds reasons to hate in the name of religion, politics, race, and ethnicity. In so many cases, the world is driven by greed, territorial ambitions by nations, and the desire for power. I know my comments on Sunday morning are not going to change the world, but we can do something about our own little corner of the world. And so perhaps as we take a break from searching for Easter eggs and candy, perhaps as we gather with family and friends for Easter dinner, we might think about the meaning behind this day and the words spoken by the one that Christians honor today. From the Gospel of John, Jesus said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Those are truly words that can change a mean-spirited world for all the people who live here. I'll be back in a minute. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. Keep in mind your source for news anytime is uppermichigansource.com. You can also find the Ryan Report at that same address. A special thank you to Reverend Leon Jarvis for joining us on this Easter Sunday show. Next week, we have another interesting guest as we'll talk with the man in charge at the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. Hope you have a wonderful day on this Easter Sunday, and make it a point to join us again next Sunday morning.